Around this time 1 year ago, I got a Dell Latitude E6510 business laptop. I've already done all my various videos on it, but anyway, that's not relevant. I've decided that it's that time again. We're going to be testing another old Dell business laptop today. This time, a Latitude D600. I didn't really have a reason to buy this. I found it on eBay. It's been sitting in my watch list for many months now, and I finally decided to just pull the trigger on it. It was around $30 or so, but it looked fairly decent, and it's always nice to have just good project laptops ready for whatever I might need them for a video, for example. So I'm sure this thing will find some use. I also do know some of the specs. This is apparently a Centrino machine, so therefore it has a Pentium M CPU and Intel wireless. It also has 1 gig of RAM and an ATI GPU of some sorts. Aside from that, I figured, like last time, we would go exploring a little to see if I could find any more information perhaps. Starting with a fairly obvious one, the optical drive, which is a CDRW DVD-ROM combo drive with a very proprietary looking connector on it, which might be a first for an optical drive, but it appears to just be a standard drive inside a shell. This also has its original battery, which would be pretty cool except for the fact that they were known for blowing up. Not actually, but there was a pretty big recall on this back in the day, so yeah, I think I'm gonna go ahead and set that aside till I can find some more information on that. This thing also didn't have a hard drive, which is fine, but it did have the caddy and the screws and everything taped inside, which is good because this caddy is really weird. It kind of wraps around some ports, and just like the optical drive, this uses a very proprietary connector for its hard drive, so yeah, I'm kind of glad that I have that connector. The system's RAM apparently was upgraded and there's still a spare DIMM, and there's also the Intel 2200BG Wi-Fi cards. All that is accessible on the bottom, which is good. There isn't any access to the CPU, so I'm just gonna kind of hope that all of that is all good. Yeah, that's pretty much about it. It's always nice when things arrive and they're not half destroyed. Anyway, it's time for the magic moment. I'm kidding, of course. It works just fine. We have a 1.6 GHz Pentium M. I believe it is a Dothan CPU, but I could be wrong. There's also the Mobility Radeon 9000 GPU, apparently, with 32 megs of VRAM. No idea if it's any good, but I guess it's better than integrated graphics, so there you go. It's also apparently a Sigma-Tel audio controller and a Connexent modem. This is BIOS version A14, presumably from 2004, at least assuming that date is correct. It seems that the BIOS battery has died at some point. So that's pretty much about it for the BIOS. All of the settings are just factory defaults. Now normally at this point I would cut to installing a hard drive in this system, but it turns out that this actually has a disk in the drive, but not just any disk, a bootable disk, which does not happen very often. It's for Arca OS. I have no idea what that is. Let's look it up right now. Apparently it is built on OS 2. Cool. Anyway, I'm sure someone will enlighten me in the comments, but I have no idea how this works and it didn't seem to want to load, so fortunately I have a pretty messed up looking old hard drive laying around. This is just some 120 gig Western Digital thing. Also unusually, that OS was burned to a LightScribe disk. You don't see those every day. Installing the hard drive in this system is fairly straightforward. It's mounted in the same place as every other Dell business laptop I've covered so far. This caddy is apparently dated November of 2004, so I guess this computer is a lot later than I thought it was. I thought this was maybe more mid-2004, but anyway, it doesn't matter. I actually couldn't remember what was even on this hard drive, but it turns out it's actually a Windows 7 beta build. As if I haven't done enough beta build related stuff lately. Not that I was planning on using this, it doesn't actually boot, it's just kind of weird. So I figured I would install something a little more familiar to this thing. I'm just going with Windows XP for today. I thought about going 2000, but that's kind of boring to be honest. And I thought about doing Linux as well, but that's a whole nother can of worms for another time. We'll just go with something easy for today. I guess it goes without saying that this optical drive, for the most part, appears to work, but we'll come back to that later, because it had some problems. So then it's just the usual process of installing drivers, or, well, I thought it would be the usual process. There were a couple issues with audio and video drivers, so I did have to go and find some different ones. It's not really that surprising. This Sigma-Tel stuff is almost always a pain. Once I was done with that, it was time to update the OS, blah blah blah. That's boring. While it was running updates, I installed SpeedFan on the system to monitor the temperatures to make sure that they were all good, and it didn't get any higher than about 65 degrees. Not sure if it could go higher than that, it probably could, but it seems that the temperatures are fine so far. Now normally, after all of this initial setup, I would clean the system, but to be honest, this one was actually pretty good as is. I don't know if the previous owner cleaned it before, but even after pretty thorough wipe down, pretty much nothing came up other than a couple small spots on the palm rest. Not bad. So at this point, I went on my way installing software and more utilities and testing out and just setting up this system. It's been a few weeks since a lot of this footage was recorded, and I have since made a couple of developments that I figured I would add on to this video. First of all, thermals. As I suspected previously, I think that they are going to be fine, which is good because the CPU isn't accessible, so this thing will have to be completely disassembled eventually, but I don't have to today. I did install some old games and just some other stuff to get the system really working. It turns out this system does actually have some 3D capability, which I actually wasn't expecting. I won't get too big into a lot of that right now, because I am going to do a whole proper video on this laptop eventually. But what I will say is that while running that stuff, the system did get pretty toasty, but not to a point where it was actually a problem. It seemed to level off in between 65 to 70 degrees at most. However, that is only one temperature zone that is actually reported. I don't know if that's CPU, just motherboard. I don't have any GPU temperatures in here, so I still might want to take it apart at some point, but it doesn't seem to be terrible. I did notice that hard drive, however, does get pretty toasty in this system. Guessing there's not a lot of room for it to breathe, so I guess it makes sense. But I could feel it since it's directly under the palm rest. This laptop might be better served by a flash storage solution at some point. Might be something I need to look into for it. Speaking of storage, that optical drive, it worked initially. I did run some tests on it and it seemed okay, but there were a couple things I noticed with it straight away, and the more I used the system, the more the drive stopped working. First of all, there was some weird behavior from it. Sometimes it would just eject on its own, or it wouldn't read properly until you applied pressure to it. Not sure why. And another thing is that it sounded horrible. It had more and more read errors and just goofy behavior. I wasn't able to boot certain discs at all, so I did end up getting a replacement DVD drive for fairly cheap. and this one seems to be a lot more functional than the old one, and it's even a DVD burner too. Not that that's really important. The CMOS battery appears to still be in somewhat good health, since throughout the whole time I've had this system, it's held the BIOS settings. This has been without power numerous times, and it hasn't died yet. It's been a few weeks, so clearly it's still kind of works. How long it will stay working, I have no idea. And finally, that battery. I did do some research on this, but seeing that it was 20 years ago, a lot of the information is fairly sparse these days, but I found an archived version of the Dell battery program website from 2006, which had a list of battery SKUs that were affected. I compared my battery and found that it was not on this list. I'm thinking this battery is perhaps not quite the original. Maybe this thing was serviced at some point. I attempted to look up the service tag information, see if I could get any kind of warranty info, whatever, but it appears that all of that data is gone, so I guess we'll never know. So anyway, I put it back in the computer and found, actually, it works pretty well. It's not amazing, it does charge fully, and depending on what is done on here, I found that it can last over an hour, which for a 20-year-old laptop, that's pretty good. I haven't really found any other issues with it, other than the speakers. They don't sound good at all, but I'm thinking that's more of an audio driver problem, since I did also try an old version of Ubuntu on this system and the audio sounded fine, so I have no idea. So yeah, that's about it. This was shockingly easy. There's not much else to this. I am going to do another video on this eventually, and it's probably going to show up again in future videos, because honestly, this is probably one of the better Windows XP laptops that I own, so I'm thinking of just leaving this OS on here, at least for today.